Good evening. Welcome to the final installment of our 10th annual National Agenda Speaker Series at the University of Delaware. I'm Dr. Lindsay Hoffman, Director of the series and Associate Director of the Center for Political Communication. This year's theme is called Attention to the Power of Us, the Citizens of the United States. National Agenda Without Borders, as I've been calling it, has been interesting, to say the least. We've been drawing nearly 600 viewers from 20 states and several countries, so we are reaching a wider audience. To all of you out there, thank you so much for making this program a success, and look forward to another exciting series next fall. Tonight, we're continuing the conversation about the election, as well as Trump's reaction to it, and the growing national COVID crisis, among other pressing issues facing the nation. Yamiche Alcindor from PBS's NewsHour joins us. A final reminder, National Agenda is about demonstrating civil dialogue and engaging with the community. Even though we're virtual, we will be asking audience members to submit questions. Just type your questions into the chat and it may be selected during our Q&A at the end of this talk. I also want to welcome our partner university, Professor Kristen Landreville and her students at the University of Wyoming, and our co-sponsor, the Department of Communication here at UD. So Yamiche, if I can give you a bit of an introduction, you are a White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour and a political contributor to NBC News and MSNBC. You were inspired by African-American journalist Gwen Ifill, who died of cancer 4 years ago this month. And this year, you were awarded the International Women's Media Foundation 2020 Gwen Ifill Award, the White House Correspondents Association Aldo Beckman Award for Overall Excellence in White House Coverage, and the National Association of Black Journalists 2020 Journalist of the Year. I hope I'm not missing any awards. That's a lot of awards for 1 year. So everyone, please join me in welcoming virtually to the University of Delaware, Yamiche Alcindor.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm a little bummed, of course, that this is virtually, but this is the world that we're living in. This is how we stay safe. So I'm excited to be here with you, excited to share all of the experiences that I've had. And I'm just really, really grateful for this opportunity.
Well, and ordinarily it'd be kind of exciting to be in Delaware right now with the president-elect residing in the state of Delaware. Let's start with the election aftermath. President Trump just yesterday fired Department of Homeland Security Chris Krebs, who had rejected Trump's claims of widespread voter fraud. What evidence exactly does Trump have that fraud occurred in this election? Like, what is he basing his statements on? And particularly when state official after state official has called these claims offensive and wrong?
Well, critics of the president and critics of the Trump campaign say that they are really putting on not lawsuits, but theatrics, and not legal maneuvers, but fiction. People say, including judges, as well as state election officials, Republicans and Democrats, say that this election was done in a by-book manner, that the election did not have fraud. There was no massive conspiracy theory against the president. So that question of what evidence does President Trump have to make these claims of voter fraud is a good one, but it's a one that we really haven't had an answer to because the president has not provided any substantial evidence to back up his claims that he won the election, but somehow it was stolen from him, and that President-elect Biden somehow cheated his way into being the president-elect. We see lawsuit after lawsuit being thrown out in states like Nevada, in states like Pennsylvania and Georgia, in Michigan and Wisconsin. So what we're seeing is a campaign, a public campaign that is doing two things. The first is it's messaging to a Republican base that Republicans want to desperately hold on to for 2022 and 2024 and other elections. President Trump had some 71 million people come out and vote for him. So the Republican Party is sticking by him because they want to make sure that these voters stick with the Republican Party. The second thing that the president is doing is that he's collecting a lot of money. And when you look at the money that he's collecting, he's saying that it's going to an election defense fund. But we've done some digging at the NewsHour. And in fact, something like 60% of it goes into the Trump campaign, into this new political action committee that can be used for all sorts of things, including personal expenses, travel, critics would say it's a slush fund. Some people say it's going to fund the president's lavish lifestyle after he leaves office. And then about 40% of it goes to the Republican National Committee, which can use it on other Republican candidates. So that's a long-winded way to say, even if there is no evidence, there is still money being made and money being collected. And there's also this messaging component. So a lot of this is politics. But overall, we just have not seen, the president has lost at least 24 cases in court with judges saying that the claims that the Trump campaign is making, that there was voter fraud, that their election observers were not allowed to see the election, that people skirted voter ID laws. Judges have said that is utterly unsupported and fiction.
Well, you just reported tonight on NewsHour, just about an hour ago, that the Trump administration is pulling back on suits in Wisconsin. They had wanted recounts in every state, but they've decided against the $8 million for a recount in Wisconsin. What does that mean, that the Trump camp not putting towards legal action in these states he claims to have won? What does that mean that he's not pursuing that?
Yeah. Before I answer a question, I should also answer a little bit more of the question that you posed, the first one, which is Christopher Krebs. That is a completely whole situation, where you see the president firing somebody who works essentially for the Department of Homeland Security in cybersecurity for telling the truth. Christopher Krebs was saying this election was secure. We did not see massive voter fraud. We did not see any foreign or domestic interference that was substantial in this election. And what the president did was say, well, you're not saying what I want you to say, and as a result, you are going to lose your jobs. Christopher Krebs had been saying for several days that he expected to lose his job. So we're in a situation right now where the president is making false claims and firing people who are not backing up his false claims, including people who work for his own administration. Moving forward, when we look at Wisconsin, the question that you just posed to me, there was a time where the Trump campaign said, we want recounts in every single state, especially the states that are contested, which would be Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, as well as Arizona. Now they're saying in Wisconsin, we don't want to pay the $8 million that they would have to pay for the statewide recount. Instead, what we want to do is focus on two counties, Dane County and Milwaukee County. Those two counties are Democratic strongholds where Joe Biden won overwhelmingly. So there are people who say they want to keep up this recount, but it's really just to show that they want to keep up a fight. It's not to actually try to win back the state, because you can't win it back with just those two counties, especially because they're such blue counties. And we have to remember that Joe Biden is beating Donald Trump in that state by the unofficial count by 20,000 votes. So there's no way, critics would say, it's almost impossible, most would say, including Republicans, that the president will find enough votes to make up the 20,000 deficits that he is at right now. So in Wisconsin, we see a sort of shift going on where they're saying one thing, but when it comes to actually putting their money where their mouth is, the Trump campaign is doing something wholly different.
Well, GOP Representative Adam Kinzinger defended Krebs and said there's basically a loyalty purge today. What has been the GOP response to Trump's claims?
It's been twofold. When you get people on TV or on the record, there are a lot of Republicans who are wanting to stick by the president. Again, because he's the leader of the Republican Party, they're worried about the fact that there are all these different millions of Americans, 71 million of them, who voted for President Trump, who make up the Republican base. If you're a senator who's looking at your own reelection efforts, looking at your own ability to continue to serve long after President Trump leaves office, then the incentive is there for you to stick with the president for politics. So they're kind of handcuffed, I would say, by the politics of this. But then privately, there are Republicans who are telling me, we know that President Trump lost. We understand that he's not going to be president. It's 45 more days. Let him say whatever he wants to say. Let him process. Let him lash out. Let him maybe not even ever concede, except as long as he can leave the White House, we'll still stick with him. So there is this political calculus that Republicans are making where they're publicly saying, yes, we really support the president, where privately I'm hearing some people, including Republican senators who are vocal allies of the president, say, you know what, I actually want to go and congratulate Joe Biden. Senator Chris Coons, a friend of Joe Biden, has said that he has privately been contacted by senators in the Senate, Republican senators, to privately congratulate Joe Biden, though they still refuse to say publicly that Joe Biden is in fact the president-elect, which is of course what he is, where this is not a partisan situation. Trusted sources, including the AP, all the major networks, have seen and projected that Joe Biden will win this election, just like 4 years ago when they projected that President Trump would win the election. We started calling him President-elect Trump the very night he won. So nothing's changed from 2016 to 2020, except for the fact that the president wants to try to put up this fight to try to hold on to power, though he has been now is now the projected loser of this election.
Well, and one of my students, Spencer, asked the question, you mentioned on Twitter that Republicans are waiting for Trump to come to terms with his loss. Do you think he will concede? Do you think that will happen before January 20th?
Well, there are two schools of thoughts. The first is when I talk to Republican sources who are very closely aligned with the president, they say yes, if things go the way they're supposed to go, if they can prove that I was on a call with a source today, and they said, well, if Joe Biden can prove that he won, of course the president will concede. Of course the president will do what's right and essentially say I lost, Joe Biden won. However, proving that he won, when I asked, well, how does Joe Biden prove that he won? Those same Republican allies can't actually come up with a response. Instead, what they say is, well, we're not quite sure how he would do that. And of course, the main way that we've done that for the last 200 years or so is we've had trusted sources look at the votes and say, this person is the projected winner. They are the president-elect. This is not a term that started with Joe Biden. It's not a term that's going to end with Joe Biden, hopefully. So what you see there is no matter who, in 4 years, if it's a Republican who wins, we'll be saying President-elect Nikki Haley or President-elect Romney or President-elect whoever is the next president or President-elect Harris. So the idea is that this is something that has not changed. Then there's a school of thought, especially from critics of the president, who say there's no way he's going to concede. There's no way that he's going to be able to accept his biggest fear in life, which is losing. The president has openly said he hates to lose. He hates to be in a position where he feels embarrassed, where he feels like he is not coming out on top. And in this case, he lost. He is projected to lose this election. It's a hard truth. It's one that the president has not wanted to embrace. So there are a lot of people who think that the president is probably going to leave office physically, leave the White House, but he's going to do so by saying, I was cheated out of this election. The election's rigged. By the way, I'm running in 2024, and I'm going to start a media company in the meantime. So there are a lot of people who think President Trump is going to use all of his political power, all of his messaging power, all of his media power to falsely claim that he was cheated out of the election, to then go on and have influence within the Republican Party and beyond by claiming that he cheated, that people cheated, and by never conceding formally.
Well, let's focus on Georgia for a moment. With the recount, the longest hand count in U.S. history, plus runoffs in the Senate, tensions are high right now. Georgia, for nearly 3 decades, has been a Republican stronghold. My student Autumn wants to know, was it the Black Lives Matter protests that had an impact on turnout in Georgia?
I think there are a couple of things going on in Georgia. The first is that Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor, did a lot of work turning out Democrats in Georgia. She got more votes by my standards, by what reports say, in Georgia during her gubernatorial race than Barack Obama did, which is a big deal because Obama is really known as someone who was the litmus test for how big of a turnout you can get, even though I should say Joe Biden got the most votes of any person who's ever run for president ever. But Barack Obama was in some ways the goal for most candidates, Republican and Democrat, in terms of turnout. So Stacey Abrams did a lot of work getting Democrats in Georgia registered, getting them to understand that they could have a voice, that they could have power to change that state blue. It was years and years and years of work. So there's that. The ground game is I think very much credited to Stacey Abrams. Then, of course, this is an election that was happening after the death of George Floyd, who, of course, died after a police officer kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, 2 minutes and 53 seconds, where he was unconscious. Then you have those cases of Breonna Taylor, who was killed in her home, who was unarmed. Her boyfriend was shooting at the police. He said in self-defense. There was Ahmaud Arbery, who was running in Georgia and was shot by a group of white men who said that he looked like some sort of suspect, and those men are now facing charges. There was all this kind of racial reckoning in the air, and people were home, right? Because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Unlike in other places where people might be busy moving around, people are still, of course, busy working at home and taking care of their kids and other things. But people were still highly more focused on racial justice in a way that I haven't seen as a reporter. In the way that you saw corporate companies come out talking about Black Lives Matter, you saw sports organizations embrace the idea of Black Lives Matter. So I do think that not only in Georgia, but overall in this election, there was this real impact of the Black Lives Matter protests. We saw people take to the streets in all 50 states. So that made an impact. But I should tell you on the flip side, it also made an impact when it comes to GOP members picking up seats in the House. There are Democrats who absolutely feel like they lost their elections because President Trump successfully argued that the protests that were largely peaceful, but that did have pockets of violence, that they were a threat to American democracy, that they were people going too far, that people were too against the police. So they also helped Republicans in some states where you saw GOP members picking up seats and you saw Democrats lose part of their majority in the House. They're still, of course, held on to the House, but it's still not the place where they wanted to be come November 2020.
Well, I'm seeing some questions coming in on the chat, and everyone can ask questions in the chat for our Q&A starting at about 8:30. But before we get to your experience as a White House correspondent in the Trump administration, I wanted to ask you about the state of journalism. So journalism is often called the fourth estate, keeping a check on the three federal branches of government. With the rising concern about fake news, as well as conspiracy theories and widespread distrust in news, how can journalists win the American public back by letting them know that journalism's purpose is central to a democracy?
So it's a great question, but I have to tell you, I don't spend that much time thinking about how I win people back. I think you just do the job and you do the job well, and you meet people where they are, and you try to make sure that your reporting is accurate and fair, and that you get real people into your story. So one of the things that I think NewsHour does really, really well is that we go into cities, either it's virtually or in person. I, as a White House correspondent, I don't just sit in front of the lawn. I don't just sit in the White House. I go out to Southeast Washington, D.C. I go to Mexico to talk about the president's immigration policies. I go and talk to people in their living rooms. One of the things that we've been doing with the pandemic is showing what privilege people have to work from home. So right now I'm talking to you from my living room. So many Americans don't have the internet or the technology or the time or the convenience to be able to talk and do their jobs from home. Amazon workers have to still go to work. There are immigrants in this country who I'm thinking of one that I interviewed, a woman that I interviewed who's living 7 people to an apartment. And showing what it means that when she had COVID, she had to be in one room and 6 people had to be in another room. So I think really what I'm trying to get at here is that journalism is supposed to just do what it does, which is be fair and educate people. And it's really, I think we have a responsibility, a shared responsibility as viewers, as consumers of news, to also think, okay, what is my personal responsibility when it comes to information? So for me, I watch all the networks. I also read a number of newspapers. I read the Miami Herald because it's my hometown paper, being from Miami. I read the Washington Post, the New York Times. I read local news and national news because I think there is this responsibility as citizens that we all have to have when it comes to understanding race, understanding the economy, understanding how the pandemic is impacting people's lives. I'm not a healthcare reporter, but I can tell you, I've been on the phone with a number of health officials, just getting them to explain to me what it means that we're in the middle of a pandemic. What are we missing? What does it mean when the transition isn't happening? So in some ways, I feel like that's what we have to do as a country. And it can't just be journalists saying, oh, well, we really want to win back your trust. It has to be also people making the decision that they want to take in information that sometimes goes against their natural biases.
Well, we'll come back to COVID a little bit later, but I want to jump into what I think a lot of people know about you, if they've been following your trajectory over the year, is beginning in March, Trump at a White House press briefings asked you to be nice and to not be threatening. But that wasn't the first time the president didn't like your line of questioning. On March 13th, you pressed Trump on his failure to take responsibility for the coronavirus testing failures and the White House global pandemic office that he disbanded. He said, well, I just think it's a nasty question. And in a news conference following the midterm elections in November 2018, you asked Trump, on the campaign trail, you called yourself a nationalist. Some people saw it as emboldening white nationalists, prompting an interruption from Trump, who said, "I don't know why you would say that. That's such a racist question." What I'm interested in is that these seemingly intentional intimidations don't faze you. The word that comes to mind for me is unflappable, that you aren't intimidated by these things. How do you maintain your professionalism and composure when the president of the United States is legitimately, arguably attacking you for the questions that you're asking?
The way that I maintain my composure is by focusing on why I became a journalist and on focusing on the privilege that I have to hold leaders like the President of the United States accountable. I think there are people here that are joining us tonight that maybe lost a family member, or maybe you know somebody who lost their job, or maybe you are just missing your human connection and missing school. All real losses, even if you haven't lost a loved one, the feeling of losing your friends, of using human connection, all of those things can feel like all sorts of deep, deep loss. And when I think about being unflappable and thinking about focusing on my question, I think there's so many Americans who deserve a press who is focused on them and their worries and their lived experiences. So many people are not going to be able to make it into the White House. So many people may never walk into the gates of the White House. So I count it a privilege as a daughter of Haitian immigrants who came here believing that America, you could be anything you wanted to be, that there were immigrants who believed in this country enough that I could then be born here and ask the president so many questions. So to me, I really think every time that the president maybe is calling me nasty or saying those things, I'm constantly thinking, what about that worker who has to go to work today? What about that mother who just buried their 13-year-old who died of COVID? What about that person who doesn't know how they're going to feed their family tonight? And by the way, they just got an eviction notice. That's what keeps me poised and focused, because I just think that America deserves a press that is thinking about them and that is too busy trying to get answers from this president and this administration, that we're not worried about any sort of attacks or arguments or tense things. I think that I'm here to ask the questions that you at your dinner table are wondering about, especially when it comes to testing and issues of life and death, issues of racism in this country. That is what is on my mind when I have those exchanges with the president.
Well, before we move into conversations about COVID, which has become increasingly important and tragic over the past few days, I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that we talk a lot about civil dialogue, and that's part of my objective as part of the speaker series, is how do we engage in civil dialogue, particularly in speaking across differences. But perhaps sometimes that's not the ideal. And my student Mark asks, he says there have been a lot of calls for unity and an end to the normalized divisiveness, most notably from President-elect Joe Biden. And he said, I'm not sure if you saw the clip of Yvette Simpson, where she said, unity is great, but freedom is better. How do you respond to that line of thinking? What is your stance on the calls for unity and cooperation compared to the divisiveness that we're seeing today?
I mean, I think it's going to be a tall order. There are people who look at Joe Biden's call for unity. He obviously won the election. So there are about 75 million Americans who believed him when he said he could unify this country, who believed him when he said that he could wrestle back the soul of the nation. He cast this election in such stark terms, but also in consistent terms, saying that he was the person who could heal our country from kind of a raucous time period. So I think the big question is going to be, how is he going to do it? What are you going to do? How are you going to get people, the 71 million Americans who not only voted for Trump, but maybe millions also who don't believe that you're the duly elected president of the United States? How are you going to get them to get on your same page? I think those are going to be the questions that are going to be hard questions to answer, but those are the questions that I know I'll be posing in so many other Americans. But there is this sense that this is a country that is, long before President Trump, very, very, very polarized and became increasingly polarized through the Trump administration. So I think we're going to have to really figure out how we do this and what it means for our country, that this election was so close. Because I think, well, a lot of the things that I talk to Democrats about, there's a lot of soul searching going on in the Democratic Party to think, well, I don't understand how this could have been this close. I hear that from a lot of Democratic sources. Meanwhile, Republicans are saying, of course, this is an election that's close. Of course, we're a nation that's divided. So I think it's going to be a real challenge to unify this country. I don't know when, if at all, we'll ever get there. But that, of course, is a tall order and something that Joe Biden wants to do.
Well, I just want to remind the audience that we are a nonpartisan center. We're not, even though we're affiliated with the school that Joe Biden graduated from as an undergrad, we are a nonpartisan center. But I'm curious, how do you think this will be different? What do you think will be different in terms of those press briefings that you have with Trump, where he is somewhat aggressive and somewhat intimidating? What do you think that's going to look like in a Joe Biden presidency? What's going to be the difference?
Well, Joe Biden has said that he plans on bringing back the daily press briefings. So there was a time where President Trump, he was the main person communicating with the press. He was the person who would either talk to us on the lawn, or he would talk to reporters when he was getting on Air Force One at the airport, or he would sometimes, I think there was one time where he actually came out to the driveway of the White House and did a kind of mini press conference. So I think there are a number of ways that the president interacted with the media that's going to be different than when Joe Biden interacted with the media. So we'll just have to see. There are sources, especially on the Democratic side, who say it's not going to be as tense. He's not going to lash out. He's not going to be calling people nasty or threatening or all those things. But I think that we've always had the media and political leaders. We've always had a sort of tense relationship. Long before I had a tense relationship with President Trump, I was covering Bernie Sanders, and he didn't like some of my questions. So I think that at the end of the day, the press is not there to be friendly with political leaders. We're there to push them. We're there to hold them accountable. And that relationship should be a little tense when you think about the roles that we're each playing.
Yeah, that was another question I wanted to ask you, is like, how different is the press relationship with the Trump administration from previous administrations?
So I only covered one president. I've only covered President Trump. So in some ways, I can only give you information of what Judy and Judy Woodruff, the anchor of PBS NewsHour, as well as other people have covered many more presidents than me. They say that the relationship was not as tense, that you didn't have presidents lashing out at people, that, yeah, the presidents might get annoyed. They might get frustrated with a question or two, but they weren't openly aggressive to the media in the way that President Trump is. Of course, President Trump has also called the media the enemy of the people. Some of his top aides, including Steve Bannon, said very early on in the administration that they needed to make the media an opposition so that people wouldn't believe reporters. So it wasn't just that they would push back on the media, but that they would make them a political opponent so that they would be seen as the enemy, and that followers of President Trump wouldn't believe journalists, even if they were telling the truth. So there was a strategy there that the president and his allies laid out. I don't think we're going to see that same strategy with a president-elect Biden. They say that if you look back at the Obama administration, you didn't have the same exchanges with President Obama and the president, but again, and the press corps, I should say, rather. But again, I've never covered another president, so I'm very eager to see what the next iteration of the White House briefings looks like.
Well, how effective is that strategy going to be leading into a Biden presidency? Are we going to see a Trump effect where people continue to be distrusting of American journalists?
I mean, I don't think it's a Trump effect. I think long before President Trump came along, there were people all over the country who were questioning whether or not they could trust the media. As someone who's covered race for a long time, I can tell you decades before President Trump came along, there were African Americans who watch their local news and say, I don't see myself reflected in the news that I watch. A lot of people that I've talked to say, when I turn on the local news, I see Black men who are mugshots, and I see Black women who are poor, and I don't see Black fathers who are raising their families. I don't see Black women who are CEOs. I don't see Asian Americans who are not just doing math, they're also in the arts. I don't see white men who maybe are into social justice. I think that there are a lot of times, long before President Trump, people were questioning the media. So, and I think that that's going to continue to go on. I think the media should at times be challenged to make sure we're being diverse, we're being fair, we're being accurate. And I expect that to continue.
Well, let's move on to the coronavirus. Cases are surging in the upper Midwest. We are now seeing more than 250,000 Americans dead from the virus. That's more than Dr. Anthony Fauci predicted in March. But we've also seen 2 companies announce successful vaccines for COVID-19. Do you think we will see American vaccines in Trump's final days in office? Question 1. And if so, do you believe he will promote the widespread distribution of those vaccines?
So the president had a press availability where he had remarks last week on the coronavirus vaccine. And he said that by December, at least 20 million Americans will have access to the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, we're not sure which company that's going to come from. It might be, but that's the promise that his administration has made. And he has been promising pretty consistently that he would deliver a COVID-19 vaccine by the end of the year. So we'll have to watch and see if that happens. And then, of course, going into 2021, this is a transition that has not officially started yet. So President-elect Biden has, and some of his allies, as well as people who are outside of the Biden campaign who are familiar with transitions, they tell me that this transition not happening yet might delay the COVID-19 vaccine for being distributed because the Biden administration will not have had the head start of knowing all the plans that were going into the vaccine. So we'll have to watch and see. In terms of the President Trump's stance on the vaccine, I mean, he's been saying that he thinks that people should be getting the vaccine. He has said that he thinks that this is going to be one way to really deal with the vaccine and deal with the pandemic. His chief of staff, Mark Meadows, at one point said they weren't going to be able to get a control of the vaccine. So in some ways, this is a White House that has shifted, at least in rhetoric, from saying we want to contain the virus to saying, well, we know what our real focus is going to be on therapeutics, treating the virus and getting a vaccine so that we can protect people from the virus. There are a lot of critics who say that that means that they're abdicating the idea that the virus is going to be running rampant and that a lot of more people are going to get infected. But President Trump says the best way to deal with the virus is to come up with a vaccine and come up with therapeutics, despite the concerns of critics.
Well, I have a couple other questions about COVID. Particularly, I think this is a conversation we haven't seen happening, but we know that there are a lot of Americans who are skeptical of vaccines generally. Do you think we're going to see yet another divide among Americans who will and will not agree to take this vaccine once it becomes available, given we saw an increase in measles over the past year? Just a report came out a few days ago from people who refuse to take vaccines. What are the anti-vaxxer vaccine proponents discussion? What's that going to look like in 2021?
I think that we're probably going to see a divide. We're probably going to see a divide between people who want to take the vaccine and are excited about it and people who feel skeptical about it. Polls show that Americans are worried that there was politicization that went into the vaccine, that the vaccine might have been rushed for political reasons because President Trump wanted to take credit for taking the vaccine. There's also this issue of who is going to get the vaccine and who signed up for trials. There's a lot of attention being paid to communities of color who are more likely to be to die from as well as be infected with the virus when you're looking at Black Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans. But there's a lot of distrust of health organizations and the health apparatus of the United States among especially African Americans, because we've seen in the past things like the Tuskegee experiments where they infected unknowingly people with syphilis in the African American community. There's also just a lot of mistrust from government, for people not feeling like the government has been focused on helping African Americans in particular, who suffer from all sorts of different diseases at higher rates than white people, including hypertension and diabetes and asthma. So I think there's going to be a robust conversation around vaccines, and there's going to be, as a country, we're going to have to figure out how we go forward. But I know I wrote a pretty long story for USA Today when I was a reporter there on the anti-vaxxer movement, and it's strong. There are a lot of people, there are millions of Americans who believe that vaccines are wrong, even though, of course, scientists insist that that vaccines in general are safe, that vaccines in general don't cause autism and some of the other things that we've heard. Dr. Fauci has said if the vaccine is scientific, he will tell the nation. Polls show that a lot of Americans trust Dr. Fauci. So I think it's probably going to help a lot of people along if Dr. Fauci comes out and says, look, I took the vaccine, you should get the vaccine. That will probably impact a lot of the way that people see. But then, of course, there are going to be Americans who are just simply scared and skeptical.
Well, and that's an interesting point you bring out, that we need leaders to demonstrate what the best practices are. And I was kind of interested in a tweet that came from a South Dakota emergency room nurse over the weekend that went viral. I don't know if you saw this. She expressed frustration that many of her patients don't believe that they're dying of COVID-19. She tweeted about patients who said they don't believe the virus is real while they're gasping for breath.
Mm.
And it wasn't one particular patient, it's a culmination of so many people, she said in talking to CNN's Newsday. And for some of them, their last dying words is, "This can't be happening. It's not real." Can a President Joe Biden and the American media and whatever institutions that are leading the conversation in this country, can they curtail such conspiracy theories? How can we battle that?
It's really tough because a lot of people believe things that are simply not true. And I think President Obama talked about truth decay, this idea that Americans, apart from being polarized, that they can't even, they can't agree on the facts, on the truth, on the very foundation of things. And that's a really, really tough place to be. And I don't know the solution for that, because it's just a reality that we're dealing with. And I'm not quite sure how we go forward.
Well, I'll follow up with one more question about COVID. My student Callie has a question about, how have you dealt with needing to go out to these press conferences while also having to be careful about COVID-19? What precautions have you had to take?
So I'm very, very cautious. I wear gloves, I wear masks, I wear face shields at times. I have a big bottle of hand sanitizer with me. I also make sure to really social distance with people. One thing that I do when I go to the White House, I'm not at the White House at all as often as I used to be. I used to be at the White House pretty much 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. Now I'm at the White House. If I go to the White House for a PBS shot, I'm there for maybe 30 minutes instead of 8 hours. But I also, when I go to check in at the White House, I go, if I don't have a live shot, I go maybe twice a week instead of 5 times a week. I just try to be really, really cautious. And I try to put myself in situations where I'm not going to be close to other reporters, or I should say close to White House aides. It's tough because obviously I need to get reporting done, but I also don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm unsafe, because there are people in the administration who have, of course, had the virus, including, of course, the president, the first lady, the president's chief of staff, the White House press secretary, several of her press aides. The list goes on and on.
Right. Well, I have a couple questions about the state of journalism today before we hop on to the Q&A. And for those of you who are watching, you can still submit questions via the chat function, and my students will be so kindly asking those questions for you. So I often tell my students, I teach political communication and media and politics, and that journalism often wipes the slate clean every day, or maybe now even every hour or minute these days. So we kind of start on a refresh over and over and over again. What stories are we not talking about right now as we focus on the day-to-day of the Trump administration, of the election, of the pandemic? What stories are we missing out on right now?
That's a great question. There are a lot of stories. Because I think when we say focus on the pandemic, there's the numbers of the pandemic, but I think there's the evictions that that we don't maybe aren't covering in the same way. There's the hate crimes with the Asian community, seeing a lot of people targeting them because of the coronavirus coming from China. The FBI said that hate crimes against Asian Americans were up. I think that we're not covering who didn't vote. I'm still very fascinated by all the Americans who don't take part in the election and what they think about this country and the way forward. I think about homelessness, right? And what it means to live in a pandemic and live through this pandemic without having a proper place to sleep and a proper shelter. Then I think about at PBS, I should tell you that we have we have a great ability to cover a number of things. So if you watch our newscast, and hope you will now, if you haven't already, we're the news hour. So for the first, with an hour of news, maybe the first 20 to 30 minutes, which you'll see pretty much everywhere else, which is top line stories. It's COVID, it's the economy, it's national security, it's foreign policy. But then we also have science stories, right? We also have social media stories. We also have art stories. I'm proud to work at a place that still is doing that work while we're in the middle of all of this stuff, because I think it's important for people to know that there are other things happening. But of course, at the same time, as someone who covers the White House, these are life and death issues. The pandemic, there are so many different facets of it that are literally killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. And we have to make sure that we're covering that and covering it in a robust way. That means maybe we're covering it in an arts angle and in a local angle, and we're covering it through science and through learning at home and through education and through immigration. So I think that there are a robust number of ways that we cover things.
Well, the way I talk to my students about it is that news media tends to cover political events in episodic frames, which is episodes or one-time instances, rather than thematic frames. And what do you think that journalists can do to, I think homelessness is a great example. What can journalists do to bring attention to long-term issues, complicated issues that don't have an easy package to put together? It's not something that just you can have a simple answer to, like what Trump said today. What are your suggestions for journalists who want to cover things in a much more thematic way?
What's my advice for journalists who want to cover things in a much more thematic way? I think you should find places that allow you to do that. I think that there are, like, we do great series on the NewsHour. So we did a series on China. We've done a series on Brazil. We've done a series on the Mueller report. We've done a series on marijuana. So I think that you just have to find the newsrooms that allow you to do that work. And sometimes it means that you spend the first 5, even 10 years of your career grinding it out and doing stuff that and telling stories that maybe you didn't want to tell. Like I remember when I was at Newsday in Long Island, my first job, I was doing stories about lost puppies. I was doing stories about missing cats. I was doing stories about whales. I was doing stories about stuff that I didn't really care that much about. I'm not really someone who wants to do stories about kind of about kind of like a lost puppy per se, but I was really interested in learning the craft. And then I got to do stories about criminal justice, and I got to do stories about crime and about race and about social justice and the economy. So I think in some ways you have to, earn your due and pay your dues. But I think that there are newsrooms all over this country who definitely do great work thematically.
Do you think that there's a difference between nonprofit and public media, or I'm sorry, for-profit and public media in terms of how they cover things? Do you think that there are different motivations to cover topics when you are for-profit versus a public media?
It's tough to say because I've worked for-profit and I've worked for public media, and my goal and the goals of my bosses have always been the same, which is tell good stories, illuminate vulnerable populations. And that was the case at the New York Times, at USA Today, and at PBS.
Okay. All right, let's move on. My student Angelina has a question for you about why is representation, particularly among women and people of color, why is that important in journalism? Why do we need to see, or should we see, more people of color and more gender diversity in journalism?
I think because it makes the journalism better. When you're trying to cover the country and trying to cover big stories and life and death stories, you need people who represent America so that you can see America in that way. So as an African-American who has lived on the East Coast, who has immigrant parents, I have a certain life experiences that I bring to the job. Just like if you're a white man who maybe grew up in Kansas or Delaware, or a white man who grew up in Detroit, or a white woman who grew up in Miami, or like my husband, he's an African-American man who grew up in rural Virginia, as well as he grew up abroad as a military brat. So all of those life experiences put together mean something. It means something that you have gay and straight journalists. It means something that you have transgender journalists, because all of those life experiences make the journalism better. You can't cover America in a robust way, in a way that's accurate and honest, without also having people that represent all of the different parts of America.
Well, I've got a couple more questions before we hand it over to the audience. So let's get those questions in the queue as I wrap up my last 2 questions with Yamiche. So my student Jane asks, when our government, and she's comparing this, I believe, to other governments in other types of democracies and authoritarian countries, when our government is outwardly aggressive toward journalists and media outlets, what does that mean for the state of our democracy. Should we be concerned? Because, I mean, as I said earlier, the fourth estate has been something that's been honored for so many years in our democracy. But we're seeing open, outwardly aggressive treatment of the media. And we're seeing that in public opinion polls, that it's making a difference. People are distrustful. People don't believe in the news. They say it's fake news. What does that mean for the state of our democracy? And can that improve in some way?
That's a good question. And I don't think I really have a good answer to it. I think we all have to see what it means for the next few years, that we're a polarized nation. We've been polarized. We're getting more and more polarized. And I think it's a big issue. It's something that we have to deal with, but I'm not quite sure what that actually means for our democracy.
Well, my final question before we jump to questions from the audience comes from my student, Sean. And he mentions that you interned at the West Side Gazette in Miami, a local historically Black newspaper. Many of these Black press organizations have deep historical roots. What do you believe is the future of Black news organizations like the West Side Gazette?
I think they need to. I love the Black press. I love the fact that I got started at a Black newspaper, because Black newspapers often are the first gateway that Black journalists have to doing the craft. So when I was an intern at the West Side Gazette, I was 16, 17 years old and had no journalism experience. They taught me journalism. They taught me what it meant to write a lead. They taught me what the AP was. They taught me so many different things. So for me, I think that these are cherished organizations that we should all support. But as we know, local news, especially local Black papers, they don't have those same resources. They are dwindling. Their staffs are smaller. Their papers are smaller. And that really, I think, is a disservice to our country, because there's so many things that Black newspapers cover in a way that is so smart, that is so honest about the way that people are living their lives, that we all have to, I think, try to get together to support those papers. So if my advice to students, as well as other people who are watching this, find out where the Black newspapers in your city, subscribe to them, find out the local newspapers in your city, subscribe to them. That's how we help the press continue to be robust, and how we help journalists tell stories in a way that matter. I think, of course, all newspapers have the responsibility to cover African Americans in a way that's honest, in a way that's fair. I don't think that just because you have the Chicago Defender that the Chicago Times takes the pass. But when you look back at history, if you were reading the Chicago Defender and you were reading the Chicago Times, they were telling two completely different stories about America. And that sometimes can still be the case when you look at Black newspapers. So they're critically important, and I hope that they survive and continue to survive.
Well, and I hate to put off our questions for a minute longer, but I really was touched today by your conversation with my students about acknowledging their own truth and not listening to people who try to pretend that they know their truth, when you were saying that maybe you couldn't be a TV journalist. So I was hoping, if you don't mind, if you could kind of give us that motivational speech once again for our college students and those in our audience who are feeling a little lost, a little like they don't know where to go, and giving them the kind of confidence that you exude, which is so powerful in our class today.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that people often say to me is, how do you stay grounded? How are you not moved when the president is saying things like you're nasty or threatening? And I say you're either going to experience it or you will experience it. People will tell you things about yourself that you know not to be true. People will say that you don't look the part, or you're not pretty enough to be on TV, or that you're fat and that means that you can't be on TV, or that you don't look like a certain person, or that you're gay, so that means that you don't fit in this newsroom, or that you're from a small town that no one knows, or maybe you didn't go to an Ivy League school and you're in a newsroom with a bunch of Princeton graduates. And this can be, I think, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or a firefighter, people will tell you that you do not have what it takes to succeed. And I tell you, press forward, be too distracted, focusing on your mission in life, focusing on the purpose that you were created to do, the purpose of why you are here on this earth, to be distracted by any of that. Be too busy chasing your dreams, too busy chasing your purpose, too busy making this world, I hope, a better place, to be thinking about the naysayers. So many times in my career, people told me, you don't look the part. Your hair isn't long enough. You don't look like what you think, what normal TV journalists look like. And I just ignored them. Luckily for me, I have a family, I have friends that really have my back, who told me, girl, just keep on going. But I'm here to tell you, if you haven't had anyone else tell you, keep on going. Don't listen to anyone else, because no one is going to be there for you if you listen to all these different naysayers instead of yourself. Listen to your gut, and your gut is telling you, if you haven't heard it loud enough, your gut is telling you that you have everything that it takes to succeed. You just have to want it, and you have to want to stick through it. It's not going to be easy. I applied to 200 jobs before I got my first job. It's not, my mom was very supportive. She wanted me to be a journalist. My dad wanted me to be a lawyer. I had to even sometimes not listen to my own father to say, you know what? I'm going to do what I have to do. And guess what? My dad now, he's like, oh, my daughter's on TV. Oh, she's that journalist who's asking the president questions. He got on board, right? He got on board because I knew what I wanted to be. And I'm telling you that the people who are naysayers, the people who are telling you maybe you don't look the part, they're going to get on board, and they're going to be looking at you thinking, man, that's the person that I thought wasn't good enough. And they're not going to have anything else to say. So just continue on, press forward no matter what.
Well, it's very inspiring. I know my college students really appreciated that perspective today. So, all right, so we're going to get into the Q&A. It's a little different since we are now virtual, but folks on our end have been reading through all of your questions you've submitted in the chat. There's still time to submit them if you want to submit them. For each question chosen, one of my students in the National Agenda class, because there's a class that goes along with this, will read that question. So let's start with Emma, who's our first questioner. What's our first audience question, Emma?
Tracy Holden of UD references when President Trump told Ms. Alcindor and other women journalists to, quote, be nice, which drew attention to how female journalists were among the few to challenge him directly. Why did this take so long, and why did women draw so much fire from the president?
Here's the thing. I think that there were people who were pressing the president and who were trying to hold him accountable, including men like Peter Alexander at NBC. John Roberts at Fox News has asked some really tough questions. So I can't say that my male colleagues in the press corps weren't pressing the president. What I can say is that collectively, the president often lashes out at people, men and women. And there are some times where, of course, he lashes out at women in particular. There are times where he lashes out at African-American women in particular. But I will say that I think the collective conscience of the White House press corps is to try to get this president to tell the truth, is to try to get real answers from this president. And, there was an adjustment period. We were all, I think, as an organization, as an industry, but also I would say as a country, we're trying to get used to the idea of a president who often did not tell the truth. We had not really seen a president like President Trump. So I think that if we're honest with ourselves, we can all give each other some grace by understanding that it took a little time for us all to adjust and think, hey, this president is not telling the truth. And we should probably point that out over and over again. We should probably just use the word lie because that's what he's doing. So I think there was this moment where we all had to adjust and get used to the reality that we were living.
All right, well, let's take our next question. This comes from my student, Winston.
Christine asks, how do you stay so poised at White House press conferences when President Trump and his staff reply to you with such vitriol?
I kind of answered that question, which is I really do focus on my purpose and my mission. And for me, I got into journalism because of civil rights journalists. There was a story of this young boy named Emmett Till, who was 14 years old, who was murdered by a group of racist white men in 1955. And his mom had an open casket funeral for him. And the nation on the cover of Jet magazine saw this maimed young boy, and the world shifted. So you have Rosa Parks, who's inspired to go be a civil rights activist. You have John John Lewis, who's living in his hometown, saying, "Hey, Emmett Till just died. That's a wake up call. I need to be active myself." The March on Washington was held on the anniversary of Emmett Till's death. So that young boy was a catalyst to things shifting, and he was also a catalyst to my own career. So when I think about that, and I think about so many Americans who are suffering, especially during a pandemic, that's how I keep my poise. I keep my poise because I'm thinking about you and your families, and I'm thinking about all the people in this country that deserve a press that is focused on them and focused on getting answers for them.
All right, let's see. We have our next student question is coming from Lauren.
Ann Elmlinger asks, do you feel any responsibility for giving voice to lies from Trump and his administration?
No, because I think that you have to report what the president's saying, and then you have to put it in context. So at the NewsHour and on when I'm on MSNBC, I'm constantly putting the president in context, saying this is like especially right now, the president continues to say, "I won the election. The election was stolen from me. We won the legal vote." And every time I say that, I say, well, first of all, there's no evidence of voter fraud. Then I say what the president said. Then I remind people, actually, the president has lost legal battles, and he has not shown the evidence for the claims that he's making. But I don't presume to think that the media is going to shield people from President Trump and what he says, because you can turn on the TV or you can go to Twitter to see what the president says. I think it's my job to put the president into context and to tell people what's going on.
Well, I'm going to interject here with a question from one of our partners at the University of Wyoming, Dr. Kristen Landreville, who teaches political communication. And she's talking about what national media outlets are doing an excellent job covering issues that people in Wyoming and other rural areas care about. And she also says, as a professor in Wyoming, how do I convince my students that issues relevant to urban areas, the coasts, the big cities, are relevant to them?
Say that question again. I want to make sure I understand it.
I think she's asking, how does she tell her students in rural Wyoming that the issues that come up in news programs like NewsHour and CNN and all the things that we're talking about in terms of major actions that are happening in urban areas, how does she help students in rural Wyoming help them understand that these issues matter to them as well?
I think it's by showing them. I think it's twofold. I think it's by allowing them to take in the national news media and asking them what relevance do you see it in your life? Where do you see this being impacted by your life? I also think it's focusing on local news. Maybe when they watch PBS NewsHour tonight, they don't see anything that impacts their life. In fact, what they want to see is look at the local PBS station, or they want to look at the local news, and that's something that impacts their life. I don't presume that every single story I do is going to be about something that impacts the person's life directly. But I do think a lot of what I report on, including the president's handling of the pandemic, including the economy, all of those things are relevant. But I think in some ways it is about giving people the choice to understand, do you see this impacting your life? Because it has to be a dialogue. It can't be that we're forcing the news down people's throats saying, yeah, this is definitely important to you. You need to care. It has to also be that people watch themselves and see themselves reflected in the news and see their issues reflected in the news. So I know at the NewsHour, we try to make it a point to travel to different countries. So I've been to Wyoming because of Bernie Sanders, trying to go to different states so that we're not just reporting on kind of the East Coast, which is where I'm from. I'm from Miami and New York and DC. That's where I've lived. That's where I'm used to. I married a man who's from rural Virginia. That gave me an entirely new world where I understood broadband and the challenges there. I understood just running water and all sorts of things that on the East Coast, frankly, are things that are kind of settled, where land use issues are so big in rural Virginia. There are so many data centers are such a big thing. Jobs and access to hospitals or access to healthcare. We talk a lot about the African-American urban communities like the South Side of Chicago not having healthcare, but a lot of rural communities don't have local hospitals, and people are dying of the coronavirus because they have to drive 2 hours for the local hospital. So I think it's also incumbent on the media to make sure that we are doing the stories that relate to people's lives, and not only say, okay, well, this story about New York, it definitely impacts you in Wyoming. I think it has to be a two-way street.
Well, building off of that, what are some media sources that you trust most and that you would recommend to these students who are both at the University of Delaware and the students who are at the University of Wyoming, that they can get information that is useful to them and to their communities, even though their communities may differ dramatically from each other?
I think go look at your local newspapers. Go find your local newspapers, go find your local ABC station, your NBC station, your PBS station, go watch the news. And for me, I would say I read the local paper. So I read the Miami Herald, I read the Sun Sentinel, I read the Washington Post, the New York Times. I should say I'm a political junkie. So I read Politico, I read LA Times, I read Newsweek, I read The Atlantic because I like magazine stories. I read the New York Times Magazine. I would say I'm very big on international news. My parents being immigrants, my dad still lives in Haiti, so they listen to the radio a lot. And listen to the Haitian radio. But I would also say you need to watch BBC, read The Guardian, read The Telegraph, read the French newspapers. I think sometimes it's lost on people how things are viewed in the United States and what is happening in the United States, because sometimes it's the Europeans that show us some interesting story about the U.S. that maybe no journalist in the U.S. is covering. So I think the biggest thing I would say to students, apart from reading your local news and paying attention to local news, is also look at international news. Go look at how the Brits are covering us, and then get a sense of what it's like to look at America from the outside. That's critical to understand what's going on.
And I would add Al Jazeera to that list as well, and Middle Eastern sources. It's what I always tell my students is about diversifying your portfolio, diversifying your media portfolio. It's about following more than one or two sources, because that's how misinformation spreads, is when we are following one source, we're relying on one piece of information. So thank you so much. I'm going to toss it to Chelsea, who's our next audience surrogate. What question do we have from the audience?
Stephen Ward of Annapolis, Maryland asks, should the new president tweet as much as Trump? And should Twitter be banned for use by a president and get back to normal corresponding?
It's a great question, but as a reporter, I literally have no opinion on that.
Well, I mean, is it appropriate for a president to use that as a way of communicating with the American public rather than through, say, press briefings, et cetera?
I mean, I can say that I think press briefings are critically important, and that we should definitely have them. And I think that regular press briefings are a service to the American people.
But is Twitter or social media a good thing or a bad thing for the president to use?
That is literally not something that I would have an opinion on.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move forward. We have a question from Jane from our audience.
Steve Lissard asks, with the startling number of scandals and outrages coming from the White House, do you think it was a coincidence that it overwhelmed the press's ability to cover all of them, or a deliberate strategy?
That's a great question. And we know that it was a deliberate strategy because Steve Bannon laid it out. He said that if you overwhelm the media, if you throw a lot of things at the wall, that it will overwhelm the system. And that's the way to beat the media, to make it an opposition and to overwhelm the system. So there was definitely a deliberate strategy on the part of President Trump and his allies to try to gin up so much information and confuse the media in some ways, that they would then be too spread too thin. Can't talk, it's late. Spread too thin to cover it all. So it's a great question, because it's definitely a strategy that we should all watch out for. And it's a strategy that I think some critics and some allies of the president would say worked. There were days where people could not keep up with all the different scandals and news cycles, that you would have one scandal at 9 o'clock, then another one at 1, then one at 3. I mean, there's so many things that happened over the course of the Trump administration that I think we're all going to sit back and really try to digest and process what we all lived through.
Well, a question that we had in the classroom earlier today that I thought was kind of fun was, are you concerned with a Biden presidency that you will get bored because there's perhaps so much less to cover? Biden is not nearly as controversial, I would say, than President Trump.
That's really interesting. I mean, people that are close to Joe Biden tell me that he likes the idea of being boring, that he wanted he wants to be back to normal. And Joe Biden has said himself, I'm going to have a normal presidency. I'm going to have a calm presidency. Barack Obama, when he was campaigning for Joe Biden, he said something that was really interesting. He said, you're going to be able to go back to doing whatever it is that you were doing before you had to pay attention to President Trump. You're going to be able to coast and not think about the presidency every day. That's really interesting because they essentially were running on being boring. So it will be very interesting to see what's being covered and what is happening in the administration. I think there's so much to cover. There's going to be immigration. There's going to be policing. There's going to be Joe Biden's relationship with the progressive left and AOC and so many others. I think there's going to be a lot of stories to do, and I'm excited to cover them all.
Well, that's exciting. I'm excited for you. Let's loop it back around to Emma with another question from our audience.
Barbara Crowell of Wilmington asks, do we know how much influence the presence of Senator Harris had on the turnout of the Black vote?
It's really interesting. We don't really know the answer to that question yet, but I will say Joe Biden, he became the nominee because African Americans broke so heavily for him. He had more Black turnout in the primaries, in the Democratic primaries, and had more support, according to polls, than Senator Harris when she was running for president. So Joe Biden has had a long history with the African-American community, having been in government for more than 4 decades. He, of course, was the vice president to the first Black president. And I should tell you, when I went to South Carolina and other places talking to people about why they were supporting Joe Biden, they cited that as one of their number one reasons. African-Americans as a whole, they really trusted Joe Biden because he stood for so long beside Barack Obama for those 8 years when they were in office together. So there is this feeling that he has his own support base with African Americans. But of course, Black women, so many of them were excited about Senator Harris, excited about the fact that she's the first Black woman, first Asian American, first woman in general to be the vice president-elect. So there was a lot of excitement about the history that would be made and will be made when she gets sworn as vice president.
So what do you have to say about, before I toss it to the next audience question, Joe Biden is an alum of the University of Delaware, but he's also prone to many gaffes, as we all know. He's sort of the gaffe president-elect. What do you think about his change on issues around African Americans and race has meant? Because he has famously worked with segregationists like Strom Thurmond, where he's also volunteered and worked at an African-American pool when he was in, I think, high school or college. And now he's nominated this first woman of color to be his vice president. What does that say about him, do you think, as a candidate?
I guess what's his history with race? And
right, he has sort of a complicated history with race, as I think is what I'm saying. Do we know, does that help us understand how he's going to deal with some of the tough issues facing people who care about Black Lives Matter, people who care about race issues as we're going into 2021?
Well, Joe Biden has said that he understands that African Americans were the reason why he got the nomination and the reason why he's the president-elect. And in his acceptance speech, he said, "You had my back, I'm going to have your back." So there are going to be a lot of African Americans who are going to be wanting to see exactly what he does for African American communities, especially for African American women who were the most loyal part of the Democratic base. So I think that it's going to be there's a tall order for Joe Biden to do a number of things to help African Americans. I won't list off all the different things, but when we look at all the sectors, when we look at education or healthcare or policing or education or media or education or universities rather, there are so many different sectors where we see African Americans not getting equal treatment that there's going to be a lot on President-elect Biden's plate when he becomes President Biden. So I think it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch how that relationship evolves.
Okay, very interesting. I'm going to toss it now to Winston, who hopefully has another question from our audience.
Ralph asks, were you surprised by the apparent strength of Trumpism among voters this fall, evidenced by the even tighter U.S. Senate and by Democratic losses in the House, despite the defeat of President Trump at the top of the ticket? What message do you draw from the election results for the news media's coverage of the U.S. political divide?
I think I wasn't surprised because I was out, even though the coronavirus, of course, is raging. We were very, very careful when we went out, but I went out to several states And I saw a lot of Trump supporters. I spent a lot of my time talking to Trump supporters, understanding how they take in their media, understanding the connection of Fox News, of course, being the #1 watched cable network in most hours and in most age brackets. So when you see the juggernaut that is Fox News, and you see the relationship between the president and Fox News, you can understand that there are millions and millions and millions of Americans who believe the president's version of the truth, whatever it is that he's saying. And there was also, I think, some real fear when it came to the protests, when we saw what was going on in Portland, Oregon, and people saying that they were worried that the protests had gone too far. So I wasn't surprised at all, especially as an African American. I should tell you, I know that there are a lot of people who heard President Trump's racist language, who heard the way that he spoke about African Americans and immigrants, and thought that that was the right way to do it, and that was the right way to speak about those issues. So for me, I was not surprised by the fact that he got some 71 million votes, and that Republicans were able to slim the Democratic majority in the House. I think that we are a very divided country. We are a very divided nation. And I spent a lot of time talking to people about what they see and the differences in how they see the world and the country. And there are stark differences from the way that a Biden supporter sees something, from the way a Trump supporter sees something, but they were both very, very passionate about them.
Well, we've got more questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to toss it to my student Lauren, who has another question.
Casey Clark asks, how, if at all, could foreign relations be impacted by President Trump's refusal to concede the election?
I think that's still to be determined. I know a lot of people, critics of the president, say that him not starting the transition officially puts us in a tough position with foreign adversaries, because it could look like America's weak, and that could be a time to strike and try to do harm to America. But national security officials in the Trump administration have been reiterating that despite this kind of transition chaos, we are still strong. We still have all our guards up. But I should note something that I learned in my reporting with the transition. The delay between President Bush getting the nomination officially was about 37 days. Fast forward to the 9/11 Commission, and they said the delay that Bush had in getting the transition started, the delay meant that he had less people confirmed in his cabinet than in predecessors before him and predecessors and people after him. And that, quote, imperiled our response to 9/11. So these are real life and death national security issues at play when you think about what could happen if this transition delay continues to go on.
Yeah, that was just reported on, I think, yesterday's PBS NewsHour, that the 9/11 Commission report, which I didn't realize had demonstrated that there was, because of the delay between the Clinton and Bush administrations, it had real implications on national security.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, we've probably got time for at least one or two more questions. So I'm going to toss it to my student Chelsea for another question from the audience.
Jillian Burke asks, as a student from Connecticut, the Newtown shooting is very close to heart for me. What was it like covering stories in Newtown back in 2012 and questioning young students? What effect did this have on you and your career?
It was probably the worst stories I've ever covered, Newtown. I've covered a lot of different mass shootings, a lot of different stories that deal with death, with the Ferguson protests and the Baltimore protests and other just mass shootings in other cities like Chardon, Ohio. But I have to tell you, Newtown, Connecticut, it rocked me to my core. I remember crying hysterically in my car sometimes because I was so upset by the fact that these young children, 6-year-olds, were murdered in this way. And it's stuck with me. It's made me, I think, a more empathetic reporter. It's made me a reporter that is more skeptical of Washington, because everyone thought, okay, something's going to change after this mass shooting, when in fact nothing has really changed. So I think that in terms of gun reform, we've had a little bit of change, but not much. So I think that in some ways, it was a story that also taught me how tough gun reform and laws can be when you get to Washington. That even the deaths of so many young kids, 20 young 6 and 7-year-olds, first graders, that didn't move the nation, and that to me sticks with me. It sticks with me because I am someone who's always kind of brought my emotion to my reporting. It's part of who I am and what I do. If I'm sad about something, if it makes me cry, it probably means it's a good story. I've had stories that made me cry and then they ended up on the front page of the New York Times. So for me, I've always brought my full self to reporting, and I didn't do anything differently in Newtown, except that I also had some self-care. I remember Newtown was literally the only story that I can remember saying, you know what, maybe I need to take a break. And I was there for 2 weeks covering funeral after funeral, and it got to just be a lot. And I think I had to be honest with myself about how much more I could take, because it was just a really, 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 really sad story that continues to just make me sad every time I think about it.
Yes, I certainly recall when that happened. I can't imagine covering it. Let's go to one more question from our audience. Jane, do you have a question?
University of Delaware communications professor Carolyn White-Bartu asks, do you have any system for yourself to take a break or step away from the news or notifications? Or is there no downtime for professional national journalists nowadays?
It's hard, I will say, to get downtime. I have this watch on right now, this Apple Watch. It literally buzzes every time President Trump tweets because I need to stay on top of the news. And I'm constantly working. I know you've probably noticed me looking down at my phone to make sure democracy hasn't fallen apart while I'm sitting here. But that's the job, right? The job, especially of a White House correspondent, is to be on 24/7. It's not as taxing as being president itself, but when you're covering the president, anything can happen at any moment. And that's something that you take up, being a political reporter, a White House correspondent. So I consider it a privilege to be able to have that. But I also take days off when I've definitely, like I said, I love going, or maybe I haven't said, I love going on vacation, especially COVID makes me sad for so many different reasons, but also because I usually take an annual trip abroad and take some time off. I usually take an annual trip with my mom to take some time off. I've really had to get used to staycations. And as we all maybe are working from home, you realize, at least I've realized, that means that you can work constantly. There is no leaving and coming back. You're constantly working. That can be, I think, really dangerous for your mental health and for your physical health. So I've really made it a point to start walking, to exercise where I can, to swim, to do other things, to just try to remain active so that I take times. But definitely, if I'm tired, if my body says you need to go to sleep, then I take the day off. I don't push myself when I know I can't do it. My husband will tell you that I push myself a lot, and I do. I've definitely gone 24 hours without sleep before. I've definitely worked like 28 hours, 29 hours straight, but it was crazy. And it was because something crazy was really happening. But I try my best to take care of myself, to get at least 6 to 7 hours of sleep a night and to try to take care of myself.
What advice do you have for the college students in our audience tonight who are dealing with being isolated, perhaps with their families, when they ordinarily would be partying with their friends, in this very difficult political time, but also this pandemic? What advice do you have for them for sort of remaining sane? And I know a lot of them are tired of paying attention to the news. They want to step outside of it. What are some ways that students who are feeling fatigued by the news cycle to kind of recharge?
I think the best thing to do is to be gentle with yourself. I remember when I was in college, I was in 15 clubs. I was taking 5 classes. I was overextended, frankly. Try to enjoy yourself. I know that college can be a lot about networking, and you're worried about getting a job, and you're worried about getting that next internship. But really, this is the best 4 years of your life when it comes. And I know that's tough to say in 2020 because, goodness, this has been a terrible year. But it's still a year where you can have connections with your friends, Zoom with your friends, check in on your friends, have happy hour if you're over 21, drink some orange juice if you're not 21. But have time to make time for those relationships. The best advice I got from college, when I was in college, was focus on the relationships that you have. Of course, getting good grades are important. Of course, networking with that executive to get a job at whatever place you want to do, all of that is important. But what I can tell you as someone who's now 10 years out of college, the best thing I got out of college were my friends. They're my girls. They're my male friends. They're the people who are there when I can call on them when I have a bad day at work, or when I don't understand something, or when I need a lawyer, or when I need a doctor. These are my friends that I can count on and I can bounce things off of, and that we can grow together. They're the people that you can talk to about your life's dreams, and that will be there with you. So as much as you want to, of course, get the work of college done, don't don't take it for granted that you have these amazing people that are your peers, that are fellow students, that you can hold on to. Some of my best friends in life came from when I was a student at Georgetown. It came from meeting other students at George Washington or at Howard University. And those relationships I cherish so much. I cherish them so much. And I think as I think about how I'm getting through this pandemic, it's because of my friends. It's because of my family, friends that I've made my family, that have gotten me through hard, tough moments when I want to cry, when I want to scream. Those are the people that have had my back. And I think that check in on your friends who you think are strong. People are struggling more than you will ever know in 2020. And allow yourself to be vulnerable. You don't always have to be the strong person. There are probably a lot of type A personalities on this call who are making plans, and you have a goal and organization, but let yourself cry sometimes. Let yourself call your friends and say, you know what, I'm not feeling that great today. All of those things will contribute to you getting the most robust and purposeful and meaningful experience out of college and out of this time that we're in. 2020, of course, has again just been so tough, but it's also been a time of reflection. Maybe you're spending more time with your family. Maybe you're being able to see, you're getting more time to sit back and do yoga or meditate. Take the moments that we have now to enjoy them as much as you can, even if, of course, you might have lost a loved one, and that there's no way to minimize, of course, the struggle that is this year. But I think that there are some bright spots, which are try to give yourself some time, try to take that time. Oprah, one of my favorite people, she says the most valuable thing you can give yourself is time, and time to be more present, time to give yourself time to reflect on what you want to do, on who you want to be, on who you want to love, on where you want to live. All of those things are really, really important. And I would just urge you to take this time to have relationship and to also get to know yourself.
Those are wonderful bits of advice. I fully support those. We also have been doing, as part of this program, some mindfulness training with some students to give them some practice in mindfulness. So I encourage students to look into that. But before I say goodnight to you, Yamiche, I wanted to say that there is a commenter from our audience, Mark, who wants to say, Yamiche is my hero, speaking to power. Do you have any response to that?
Well, thank you so much for saying that. And thank you so much to the University of Delaware for having me tonight. It's wild times. It's a complete joy to talk to you, to meet your students, to the University of Wyoming. It was great to be in the breakout room earlier today, meeting some students. I feel refreshed. I feel energized, talking to students, talking to you, Lindsay. So thank you so much for having this conversation, for moderating this conversation. I know it's a lot to coordinate, so I really, really appreciate having the opportunity to be here before you tonight.
Well, absolutely. And I hope that we can bring you back to campus in person sometime soon when that's possible. So thank you so much, Yamiche. And thank you all for being here tonight. And those of you who've joined this entire series, I hope you've gotten some insights from all of our events this semester. You can find previous programs, plus lots of resources at cpc.udel.edu. And I invite you to join us next fall for our 11th annual program, where we'll hear from more diverse voices and experts about all things on the national agenda. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night.